Pastor Matt, thank you to you and your team for the great space and for everything that you do. I just have a few announcements and then we'll introduce Jennifer. We want you to mark your calendars for our box lunch talk next month. It'll be the Land Preservation Program. Deborah Bowers will be our speaker. That's May 21st. And there's more information on the website about all of these events. Of course, Memorial Day, the Society will be closed May 27th, but we'll be in the parade. We'll see you in the parade. June 1st, Campus Cleanup Day. If you're interested, you can again check out the website. It's all hands on deck day at this society, Campus Cleanup Day, June 1st. And then June 6th, we're partnering with the Carroll Arts Center for our 85th anniversary variety show. That should be a fun event from 5 to 7. It's a free event. And some of you might know of the play that Dorothy Elderdice wrote in the 1950s called The House That Jacob Built, about the Shellman House. We're going to do part of that play in partnership with the Carroll Community College, so that should be a lot of fun. And there'll be a lot of different announcements and some entertainment. We have two sponsors for today's BLT. The first is Dorothy Hashert, and the second sponsor is Eric Shipley, and I just met Eric. Thank you so much for your sponsorship. I don't know if Dorothy is here. I don't think Dorothy's here, but you know, the BLTs, we have a little cost for the rental of the hall, and of course some costs with the refreshments, and then the recording costs with our partnership with the Media Center. So these sponsorships are, you know, a nice way to be acknowledged or honor someone. And if you're interested in a BLT sponsorship, just come see me or Laura. We're around. Okay, so Jennifer Munch is on the society board. She serves as our secretary and secretary extraordinaire. She also chairs our Bourbon, Bluegrass, and Bocce fundraiser. Some of you are familiar with that. We've had it at the Union Mills Homestead for the past couple years. That's in the fall. Jennifer is a retired CPA and worked as Senior Vice President and Treasurer of the Town and Country Trust, a real estate investment trust that traded on the New York Stock Exchange before her retirement. Since her retirement, in addition to her many volunteer activities, Jennifer tends to her small farm where she no longer has horses and donkeys, just chickens and bees and a garden that is way too big. Recently, her farm was utilized for an independent film project, which was a pretty exciting endeavor in 2023. Please welcome Jennifer to the podium.
Well, thank you for inviting me to talk about my bees. My family learned a long time ago not to ask me about my bees, how they're doing, because they know I will launch into telling them more than they were polite enough to ask me. So I'll try to keep this a little shorter. I'm also going to take this off because it's hot in here in this thing. So anyway, the bees go back 65 million years. Later on, humans and animals came to enjoy the sweet honey that they produce. And early humans developed a taste for sweet food. Because, you know, sweet food usually indicates a lot of calories, a lot of extra nourishment. And so we became hardwired to crave sweet things. So, you know, we can't be blamed that we like donuts. We're programmed that way. But anyway, the sweetest food that was available to prehistoric people was honey. And so sugar came along much, much later, about 400 BC or so. Some parts of the world, people began to produce sugar from cane and from things other than honey. But it really wasn't until the Middle Ages that honey really, that sugar really became used a lot in Europe and places like that. So, you know, for an awfully long time, it was really just honey. There is an 8,000-year-old cave painting that shows a man with a basket on his back climbing up a vine, taking honey out of a bee's nest. There are angry bees all around him, and it's a fascinating old cave painting from way back when. And honey was often used for its antibacterial properties as well, and their wax, of course, was used for candles, so they were useful for a lot of things. Bees have been mentioned in a lot of stories and legends throughout history because they have really a special relationship with us humans. They really do become sort of a part of the human family, and we depend on each other a bit. There's a very old tradition throughout Europe and even in New England in the 19th century that demonstrates the close relationship between bees and their human families. It probably has Celtic roots. The legend goes back, or the practice goes back centuries, and that's the idea of informing the bees if there is some significant life change in the household, such as deaths, especially deaths, and births and marriages. And because some people have believed that bees were a link between the physical and the spiritual worlds, and that if the bees were not informed as members of the family, negative things might happen. They would leave, or they would die, or they would stop producing honey. And so people would drape a black cloth over the hives and set the bees in mourning, is the way they put it. They would rap on the hive. They would tell the bees of the death, and then they would ask them not to leave, that the new master would take good care of them, and then please don't leave. When Queen Elizabeth died last year, the royal beekeeper informed her bees and kept that tradition going. So I remember that my grandfather had a beekeeper's veil along with his coats hanging up in the hallway, but I never really had anything to do with his bees back then. And I know that my grandmother always had a dish of honeycomb in the pantry that we would go into. And but when I decided that I would like to get involved and have bees, I started out by taking a class. The Carroll County Beekeepers Association is a great group, very supportive of each other and of new beekeepers, because they really want you to make it. And so I started out with that class at the community college. They usually teach it about January, 8 years ago. And that spring I got my first bees. And I was lucky, maybe beginner's luck, because that first summer I got 34 pounds of honey from my bees. So it was a kind of a neat thing. And since then I've had some really good winters. I've had some not as good winters. And but I've learned a lot, and especially by making classic mistakes. And I don't know, I think I've made them all, but probably not. So looking forward, I'll probably find a few more classic mistakes to make. But normally I have 2 hives. I've had as many as 4, but 2 is a good number for me. So bees themselves are a very highly specialized society. They're like ants and termites in that they're sometimes referred to as a superorganism. The entire colony, even though it's made up of thousands of single bees, the colony itself is an organism of its own. And so all of these bees living together as basically a single entity. And individual members can't survive very long without being in the hive. They all have to be a part of the hive in order to survive. They will not last very long on their own outside the hive. So a hive consists of one queen, only one, ever one, the male bees called drones, and the female worker bees. And no matter, there are the 3 types of bees. Some of them have only one job, some of them have many jobs, but each one is important for the success of the whole hive. First of all, the queen. She is that's the one in the middle, and that's the largest one. As I say, there's only one queen in a hive. She spends all her time laying eggs. She does nothing else. She leaves the hive one time, right after she's hatched, and she goes out on what's called a mating flight. She flies out of the hive. Drones are out there flying around, hoping she'll come by, and she will mate with many of the drones, and by the end of the day, she comes back to the hive, probably not leave the hive again, and she will have all the sperm that she will need for the whole rest of her life. for her whole productive life. And the worker bees feed her, they keep her warm in the winter, they take care of her completely. She does nothing but run around and lay eggs in each little cell. And she does that for the rest of her life. She won't leave the hive again unless there's a swarm. She will leave with a swarm of bees. And or if a beekeeper messes up and does something, hurts her some way, she puts out pheromones, which the workers spread throughout the hive. And this is the way that they basically communicate through scent. Because of these pheromones, the bees know there's a queen there. They know if they lose her. They know if she's becoming weak and maybe not up to snuff anymore, laying many eggs. So this is all as a result of the pheromones that she puts out. The drones, or the males, the ones here on the right, that's about 5% of the bees in a hive. And they have one job, fertilize the queen. That's all they do. They fly out of the hive, they hang around, waiting for a queen to come by. And if one comes by, if they're lucky enough to find one, they mate and then they die. If they don't find anybody and they don't have any luck that day, they fly back to the hive and they go back another day. And that's really the only job of the male. It's important, but it's the only thing they do. In the winter, towards the end of the summer, bees are pretty clever. They suspect that the days are getting shorter, that there's not as much food. And so sometimes they will often push a lot of those males out of the hive. And then, of course, they'll die. You just push them out of the hive and they're going to die. Because at that point, they're only mouths to feed. They're not doing anything else. And so you don't need many. You just need a few. So they push a lot of them out. And then there's the worker. They are all female. They're all sisters. And that's the majority of the bees in a hive. That's 95% of the bees in a hive. And they do everything. They forage for nectar. They feed and care for the larvae. They tend to the queen. They heat the hive in the winter. They cool the hive in the summer. They clean the hive. They build the honeycomb. They forage for nectar. They make the honey. They store the honey. They cure the honey. They defend the hive. And so they do everything really. That they're the ones who work in the hive, and they are the only ones with a stinger. The drones really don't have a stinger because their job is not security, and the queen doesn't need one. So generally, for the most part, the younger bees work inside a hive, and as they get older, then they start doing outside jobs, foraging and work in security, defending the hive. Bees can forage for several miles. They can go up to 5 miles, and when they return to the hive, they communicate with other forager bees. You may have heard of this waggle dance they do. When a bee has been out foraging and she has found a nice source of nectar, she will come back and she will communicate with the other bees by doing a kind of a dance and just wiggle around, and they know what it means, we don't. But it's the way that she will communicate that she's found a good place for other bees to go forage. And bees know when they need a new queen, and they'll raise the next queen. They do this themselves. There are 3 things that can cause a hive to have to raise a new queen. The colony is getting too crowded, and they're preparing to swarm. They will raise a new queen for that. If they sense the queen is getting weak or old or not doing time to be replaced, they'll raise up a replacement queen. And then, of course, if the queen is lost for some reason or she dies, they have to make a new queen. So as soon as a colony knows that they need a new queen, and they do this based on the presence or the strength or the absence of these pheromones, then they'll raise a new one. They start with a 2 or 3 day old larva and raise that one into a queen. So 3 days after the queen lays an egg, it develops into a little larva. And any female larva that hatches from a fertilized egg can become a queen, strictly because of what she's been fed. The first couple of days in the lives of all the larvae are fed the same thing. You've heard of royal jelly. It's something that the bees secrete and they feed the larva this royal jelly, and everybody gets the same stuff for about 2 or 3 days. And then most of the bees, they'll change their diet at that point, and they'll start to feed them pollen and honey and some protein that they found. And then if there's a need for a new queen, once those couple of days have passed, they will pack the little larva's little cell with all the food they're going to need, and they put a little wax cap over top of it, and then that little larva will develop into a regular bee. But if they feel they need a queen, they will take a couple of those cells, and they'll continue to feed them royal jelly and hormones that they secrete themselves, and they will pack that cell with that other special food. And they'll do maybe 2 or 3 cells like that, and then they'll cap that, and that will grow into a queen. These extra hormones will help that bee develop ovaries, gets to be a longer bee, has a longer abdomen, and the queen cell itself kind of looks like a peanut. If you're going through the hive and you see what looks like a peanut in its shell hanging on a frame, you know the queens are thinking, the bees are thinking about getting a new queen for one reason or another. And so that's where that comes from. If there are a couple of queen cells in the hive, if they've gotten a couple of them and a couple of them are developing, the first queen to emerge will tear open those other cells and kill that larva, because there is only ever one queen. And she's going to make sure nobody else makes it. If for some reason a second queen hatches, she'll kill it, because there's only one. So the first thing that a little bee does after it hatches from its cell, a little worker bee, the first thing it does is clean its cell. So it's ready for another egg and its next occupant. So they learn early to take care of things. So it takes about 21 days from the egg to an adult bee on average. A worker bee lives just a few months. And although the ones in the winter live a little longer, we don't know why they live a little longer, but they do. But a queen can live 2 or 3 years. In the winter, the bees form a cluster to keep warm. And even on really cold days, the temperature inside a hive, inside that cluster, can approach 95 degrees because the bees are all in there, flapping their wings and generating heat, and keeping the queen warm in the middle and keeping the whole cluster warm. And so we don't open a hive if it's 55 degrees or below. Just leave the hive closed because you don't want the heat that they've worked so hard to generate to escape. And then in the summertime, when it's hot, the bees fan their wings down at the bottom at the entrance to the hive, and to try to keep it at a constant temperature and to reduce the humidity inside the hive so that they can dry out the nectar and so the honey can cure. So I just stay fascinated with these things because, it's dark inside the hive, and yet everybody knows what to do. Everybody has their job, and they know what to do, and they tend to each other. And I don't know how, but they do. They're very neat, they're very tidy. They'll carry out any debris, any dead bees, anything that's in the hive. One year, it was very late in the winter, and I put some extra food in the hive because I was concerned they might run out of their stored honey. And so I put a piece of wax paper inside the upper cover, inside the top of the hive, and I dumped some sugar on there. And later on, after they'd eaten all the sugar, they tore up that wax paper in little tiny pieces, carried it bit by bit down through the hive, out the bottom entrance. I had a blast just watching them. Just watching them struggle, pulling these little pieces of paper out. But that's the way they do. So for a long time, the only way that you could obtain honey from bees was to destroy the hive. Just tear it up. And that was often when you found a hive in a hollow tree or some protected spot. Then we got the idea of using something, maybe an overturned basket or something. Encourage the bees to set up shop in there. And that works, except when you go to harvest it, same thing. You destroy the hive. And so in about the mid-1800s, a man named Langstroth came up with the idea that of the design that we use today. It's made up of frames, and that go into stacks of boxes. These frames hang in there a lot like a file in a filing cabinet, like a Penaflex hanging file in a filing cabinet. And these frames just, hang inside the box. And the frames start out with a piece of flat plastic or beeswax. And the first thing the bees do is produce the honeycomb out of the wax with a 6-sided cell. In the absence of a frame, they'll produce the comb in big blobs. Or if they run out of room, they'll make big blobs of honeycomb, always with the 6-sided, always this hexagonal shape. Because in nature, it's just instinctive for them. And in nature, the hexagon is the most efficient shape for storing anything. So the queen lays an egg in each cell. Usually she does it in a half-circle pattern on each of these frames that they've built the honeycomb out of. And then the bees deposit nectar in the other cells for making honey. And they mix that nectar with enzymes that they produce, and it causes it to eventually become honey. We don't really know how it happens. We've never been able to duplicate it, but they know what to do. And once it's cured a bit, they cap those cells with wax and then just let it cure a little bit more. They produce and store honey, of course, for their own food. But in the spring, when the trees begin to blossom, the bees are really busy. And they're bringing in lots of nectar, making lots of honey. They're also bringing in water. I see them at the pond, getting little drops of water and going back to the hive with that. So they bring in water as well. And so the beekeeper, when you see that happening and you see that they're busy making honey like mad, you put some extra boxes on top of the hive with frames, and they will make the honeycomb once again, and they will start filling those boxes with honey. And you put that in there until about early in the summer or midsummer, and then we'll collect that honey from those top boxes. And then after that, everything else that they make for the rest of the summer, because they'll continue making honey, everything is for them for the winter, because they need a good store. A hive needs my hives need about 30 pounds of honey going into the winter, just to keep them alive for the winter time. And one of the first foods that bees go to is a dandelion. And so you look at dandelions in a whole different way. You're not so fast with the Roundup when you have bees, because that's the first thing that's available before the trees start to blossom or anything else. And they're hungry and they need to go out, and it's the dandelion. That's the first thing they hit. So when you see dandelions, you think, there's some happy little bees around. So the hive that we use today is made up of stacks of boxes with a bottom board, which I didn't bring with me, and then these boxes, and then an inner cover, and then a top. And I wanted mine to be pretty, so I have a nice copper pitched roof on each of mine, and I painted it to match the house, but that's just me. And the next thing I bought was a suit, because you really need that. So to collect the honey, we remove those frames that are full of the cured honey, brush the bees off it, of course, and then we cut that wax capping off and off the top of the cells, and we put the frames into a centrifuge that slings the honey out of the honeycomb. And then we filter it, and that's all we do. We bottle it. And that sounds simple, but it is a sticky mess. I have a friend who comes and helps me, and sometimes he brings his students along because he wants his students to see how this whole process. So sometimes I have some muscle to help me, but oh my golly, when the day is done and you've got a couple of buckets of this nice honey, it's really great, but I'm hours after that just cleaning the stickiness and the doorknobs in the house, everything you touch is a sticky mess, but that's just a part of the process. So the way that a honeybee colony produces is by swarming. As a hive gets crowded, the bees will know that, and they'll often raise a new queen, as I say, by feeding a larva or two the special diet, the queen food. And then one warm, quiet, still, windless afternoon, a queen and a large number of the bees will leave the hive in a mass exodus. And they'll leave about a half or a quarter of the colony behind, along with that developing little queen cell. And last year, I captured my first swarm. Usually the bees will congregate in a tree branch or somewhere. I was so lucky because mine were on a bush and it was low and I could get to them. My beekeeper friends all have stories about climbing way up in a tree or way up beyond where their ladder will reach and climbing out there and trying to capture this swarm in a box. They're real docile right at that point because they've gorged themselves. They just know what to do. They have gorged themselves with honey before they all take off, and so they're pretty docile, and the queen will be in the middle of the pack, and then there will be scout bees that go around trying to figure out a good place for them to go, and that's how mine worked out. But they're so cool because I had this big cluster of bees, many thousands of bees in this cluster, and I had already prepared, since it was close by, I had already kind of prepared a hive for them. I had a box, I had some frames hanging in it, I was ready, and I put a tarp down under this swarm. I shook the bridge, the bees all fell down on the tarp. It was really cool. And then I dumped them into my hive, but of course I didn't get them all in the hive. The bees were everywhere. They were all over the ground. I spoiled some. It was a mess. And so, but then they know that queen is there, and they know where she is. And so for the next hour or so, bit by bit, those other bees just found their way up off of the grass where I'd spilled them everywhere, up into the hive. And that's really right now one of my strongest hives, is that hive that came from the swarm. So it's just fascinating to see how they are. And like I said, they're really docile at that time. I wore my suit, but I didn't feel I was even in danger of getting stung, because they're just, they've got a job. They're busy. They're busy with their swarm. So if you don't capture them, they might make it. They might find a place to go form a new colony, but a lot of times they don't make it, because they need better conditions. And the Beekeeper Club has members who will go out and collect a swarm, if you've got a swarm, and it's great, it's free bees for them, and they can get rid of that swarm for you. So a good beekeeper inspects their hives. You keep a close watch as to what's going on. Bees have been around for millennia, and they know what to do. They know how to take care of themselves, and an awful lot of what they do is still a mystery. But in the world on their own, many colonies wouldn't make it. And so if you want to keep them going and harvest the honey, and then you need to understand how they operate, what makes them tick, and then provide what they need to thrive. And when things go right, they can feed themselves. They can still give us a good honey crop. And of course, they're very important to humans, for a lot of reasons. First of all, they give us honey, which is a remarkable food. Some people who have allergies like to take a little bit of honey every day from some honey that's very local, that will be made out of pollen and that they are sensitive to. And so a lot of people find that does a lot of good for them. The honey has a lot of antibiotic qualities, and it's good for, it was used for centuries as a medicine, as some sort of a medicine for that. And it's the one food that does not spoil. It can keep indefinitely. And there have been tubs of honey found in ancient pyramids and stuff of honey that's still good. They break it open and the honey inside it is still good. So it can keep forever. It can become granular. If it gets cold especially, it can get a little bit grainy. But you heat it up and it's right back where it ought to be. It restores its consistency. Of course, they were also important through the years for beeswax to make candles. And a lot of the monasteries in the old days kept bees just for that, not only for bees and for the honey, but also for making the candles and such that they needed. So also, bees are important pollinators. As they forage, they collect pollen on their hairy little legs. They have they call them pollen baskets there on their legs. They brush the pollen into those little sacs, and they carry it back to the hive, and that provides the protein that they need in their diet. When they're going from blossom to blossom, they're spreading pollen all around, and so they're pollinating the plants as they go. Some crops, almonds especially, are very dependent on bees to pollinate. And I just love to watch. I could just stand there and watch them all the time, watching these bees come and go with little pollen baskets on their legs, different colors depending on, the pollen's different colors depending on what flowers they've been to visit and where they've been. And of course, different honey, even from year to year, can look different, and the color can be different because it's all dependent on where the bees got the nectar and got the pollen that they've used to make that honey. So there are a lot of things that can go wrong. Even the best beekeepers lose hives. There's a problem currently with a mite called the varroa mite. It's harming a lot of colonies. And so you have to test, see if you have them, and if you have those mites in your colony, and if so, treat. And bees, as I say, can travel 5 miles. So even if your yard is clean, they can find bees other places and hang around with them for a bit and come back with a varroa mite. So you have to keep an eye out for things like that. And of course, some pesticides can harm a hive. The problem is not always so much with farmers, because they don't use a drop more pesticide or herbicide than they need because it's expensive to cover a whole field. It's us homeowners sometimes. We go out and buy a bottle of stuff, we mix it up maybe too strong, saturate the plants with it, and so we can be as much of a problem as anybody else. But bees have been around for a long time. They've been around forever, and they're probably going to still be around for a long time. But whatever we can do to help them and get good honey from them, it's worth doing. So thanks for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about my bees. If you think you might be interested and you would like to get involved in bees, I really recommend that you start with the Beekeeper Club. The Carroll County beekeepers have a 6-week course in January usually. They tell you all about bee biology and the way they live and the way they act and think and how to best care for them. And they also will provide you with a mentor. If you've got a question, you've got a problem, they'll come out and help you. And of course, as I say, they'll come out and help capture a swarm if you have a swarm nearby. So the more you understand about them, the better you're able to help them thrive. And as one of my beekeeper friends says, Winnie the Pooh summed up bees the best. Winnie the Pooh says, "You never know about bees." So, thank you.
We might have a couple of questions. I have one question.
Yeah.
I missed it. What's the reason they swarm again?
That's the way a hive reproduces. The hive is getting too full,
Okay.
and they need more space. So they will basically start a new hive. They'll create a queen, and they don't have a meeting to decide this. I mean, somehow or other they just don't know to do this. They create a new queen, and then generally one afternoon, if it's not very windy and everything, off they'll go. They all go in one bunch and go off and find a new place to start a new hive. If you're lucky, you can get them in a good, in a real hive. So.
Jennifer,
Yeah.
what kind of food do you raise? Do you have a field of dandelions, or how do you help your bees get food?
I don't do much to help them really. Of course, I live out in the country. There are lots of, but they even raise bees. There are bees in the top of University Hospital. Somebody has put in a couple colonies of bees up there on a roof at University Hospital. You could go and look at them. It's up there on the, I guess that's maybe the 6th floor, over there near the cardiac spot. Because bees will go find food. You know, there are flowers. Everybody's got flowers. And, you know, even in the city, there are trees. There's just pollen. There's stuff. They find it. They go forage. Where I live, I've got fields. I live within a few miles of Balker's orchard, and I know in the spring, I'm sure they're all down at Balker's. But I have, you know, some flowering trees at my house too. Through the summer, they're at the garden. When the clover is blooming out in the fields, there's usually something in bloom everywhere, you know, that they'll find. If you are starting a new colony and it's a very young colony and you're a little bit worried that, you know, they need some help. It's late in the summer. They've got to make a lot of honey really fast before it gets cold. I will feed them. And you feed them a mixture of, it's 1-to-1, 1 pound of sugar for 1 pint of water. It's very, very thick. So you end up cooking for your bees because you make this and get it hot. And there's a piece of equipment you put on the top of a hive where you dump that sugar water. If you feel that, you know, it's going to be pretty hard for them to bring in enough nectar to make enough honey to get them through the winter. And so you'll sometimes feed them that way. But they find food everywhere.
Bill, you have a question? Yeah. I got a microphone for you.
Okay, a few years ago, up until quite recently, I think there was a lot of concern with colony collapse. Are you still having problems? What do you think is going on?
I don't know. I hear about it. There are a number of things that are gone wrong. This varroa mite is one big piece of that. It's a little mite, it attracts the drones, and then it gets into a hive and it just wipes the hive out. We've gotten better at detecting it and treating for it. Loss of habitat, is a concern. I think it's a multi-pronged thing. Pesticides, certainly. Bees get into the wrong stuff, and if you, like the farmers around you, you have a good relationship with the people who are farming around you. If they're going to be spraying something on the field that you think might be a bit toxic, if you're staying in good touch with them, they'll let you know. You can close up the hive. At night they all go in. You can close up the hive, keep them home for the day until whatever they spray has dried, and then you can let them go out. And so there are things that you can do to look after them, but certainly, there are. I don't know. I haven't worried too much about it, but at the same time, I know it is something that people are very aware of, and it's just like everything else in the environment. You've just got to take care of the world that's out there, and the less harmful stuff you do, it's better for the birds, the bees, for everybody. Just take better care. Yeah.
Have you ever lost your queen and the hive did not produce a new one?
Yeah, I've lost a queen. I've lost a queen more than once. Yeah.
So did you get a queen from your?
I have gotten a queen. There are several things you can do. One thing you can do is some of the beekeepers have fun. I don't go into it this heavy, but some people will raise their own queens, and they'll sell them. And golly, one year I lost the queen. I drove to Harper's Ferry because it was late in the year and nobody else had any queens around, and there was a man up there raising queens. I bought a queen from him. The other thing that you can sometimes do is if you've got a good strong hive, it's full of brood, full of bees that are about to hatch, larvae and capped larvae. You can move some of that brood over into the hive that lost its queen. If they know fast enough that they lost a queen and they have brood in there, they can, as I say, raise a queen by feeding a couple of the royal jelly. But if not, you can move then and sometimes some brood in there. They'll make a queen and they'll build a strong hive. There are ways you can take a strong hive, put newspaper in between at the top of it, you put more boxes up above it. Sometimes you can encourage the bees to go up there and start a new sort of a hive. I had a problem with, they lost a queen, and it was in the winter when there was no way to make a new one. And a couple of the worker bees started laying eggs. They developed, I guess, enough ovaries or whatever, they lay eggs, but they're not fertilized. So they're of no use. But the problem with that is they think they have a queen. And so when you give them another queen, they're like, we don't need you, and they'll kill it. So you have to find a way to introduce a new queen, basically with that newspaper split and bring another hive, and they'll sort themselves out. So that happens a lot.
Oh, sorry, Jennifer.
No, I'm done.
Well, what's a queen go for nowadays?
I'm trying to remember. I think I paid about $50 for that queen. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mayor, did you have a question?
You said that the second queen hatches and the first queen will kill it.
Mm-hmm.
If queens don't have stingers, how does the first queen kill the second queen?
Good. I know that the whole colony can kill a queen by cooking her. They will gather around that queen until it gets so hot that she will die. And they will do that. And I honestly don't know, Larry. Maybe she's got a singer and I don't know it. But I know that they will, if they decide that there's a predator queen or one they don't need or one that they're about to replace, that's how they'll kill her, is they'll cook her. Yeah.
First off, thank you for sharing your passion and your knowledge with us. Earlier you said that there are many mysterious things that bees do that we don't know why they do them. What are some of those things?
Well, just first of all, the idea of just knowing what to do. You know, it's like, who tells them, well, you go out and bring in some nectar, you know, or no, you are a nurse bee that you take care of the little larvae and bring them the food, and or no, your job is to stand there and fan your wings and keep the hive. How they know what to do, and yet they do. There's nobody in there telling them, and they're all the same bee with the same body, you know, structure. The idea of knowing that there is a queen, or no, there is not a queen, or this queen needs to go. How do they know that? How do they know when something invades the hive? One of the things that they'll do is that if you look at the things I have in the back, they make this really sticky stuff called propolis. It is the stickiest stuff you'd ever. And they make that and they plug up any cracks in the hive. You know, how do they know to go, you know, get some resin or whatever from a tree and pack that in there? If they get invaded, like if a mouse comes into the hive, of course they would kill the mouse. But then, if it's too big to drag out, they'll put that propolis, that sticky stuff. They'll put that sticky stuff all over and seal it off. And you know, they just do all of this stuff, just basically from instinct. And you know, how they know to, it's like when it's time to swarm. You know, how do you get like 30,000 bees to decide, fill up guys because we're leaving at 4 o'clock this afternoon? You know, how do they know? How do they know to do that? And then they all go out and they form up, you know, they form this cluster. And, you know, so you shake them out of the tree and you dump them in a box. And how do they know the ones that landed that I spilled, that you landed on the ground? How do they know? Oh, crawl in there because that's where we belong. We got to go in there. They just, you know, they just operate on their own. And yet they can do stupid things too. They form a cluster in the winter, as I said, and that's how they stay warm, and they keep the queen warm and keep everybody warm. And you know, they're on a frame that's full of honey. Well, they eat that honey, and then there's more honey. There's honey over there, and there's honey up here, and sometimes they'll only go up here and work their way up, using that honey that's stored. And there's honey over there, but they don't see it, and they'll run out and they'll die. And it's like, tell me, you had all the nectar, you had everything you needed. So, you know, sometimes you think, I wasn't so smart, but that's bees. You never know about bees, as Winnie the Pooh says. So,
Those bees are so tiny. When they are going out and foraging, how much nectar or honey can they bring back?
tiny, tiny, tiny bit. It takes a lot of bees, a lot of trips, to bring in that honey, and then it's going to cure and concentrate a bit. So, one drop of honey, and if you look back there in the back, you'll see the cells where they have packed that and made honey. That's the result of lots of trips, of lots of bees, and there are, when a good busy hive in the summer, you might have 40, 50,000 bees in there. It's a lot of bees, but each one is doing just a tiny, tiny little job, bringing in pollen. Yes, ma'am?
Jennifer, how much honey do you make in that gigantic vat thing? I see you have multiple bottles. How much?
You can get one of those boxes when the frames are full. There's probably about 30 pounds of honey, or the box might weigh 30 pounds. There's probably maybe 25 pounds of honey in one of those full boxes. This past year, I had the biggest year I've ever had. And I had, what did I have? 40, I think I decided I had probably about 80 pounds out of my hives this year. It was a good year.
What do you get, Jennifer Munch honey?
I happen to have some. The beekeepers, whenever there's a festival or fall harvest days or anything like that, the beekeepers are all manning a booth, answering questions, telling people all about bees, and they all are selling their honey. The interesting thing is, and everybody has a little squeeze bottle with a sample, because everybody's honey is different. And it's kind of interesting, because it depends on what the bees ate, what the bee, not what they ate, but what they brought in, what pollen, what nectar they brought in. I don't have any real outlet for mine. I give most of it away, to tell you the truth. My family, I keep them in honey, and every so often I'll sell a bottle, But I need one of these days I need an outlet. This year I was like, my golly, what am I going to do with this honey? But it keeps forever. So it's not like, it's not like the eggs or something like that, where, you have too many and you got to get rid of them in a hurry. That stuff can keep year after year. So, you don't have to hurry. Yes, ma'am?
I've got the mic here.
Just two things, Jennifer, you might want to mention that a pound is one of those jars.
Yeah, one of those jars is a pound. Yeah.
What we're used to buying.
Yeah.
That's a pound.
Yeah.
The other thing is, my question I asked you earlier, and I'm going to go back to some pictures to find it, and that's about the queen and the blue dot.
Oh, the queen and the blue dot. Okay. When you are looking at thousands of bees on a frame, and especially when you've got your veil on and everything else, I had the darndest time picking out the queen. When you see her, it's like, oh, of course. She's bigger, she's longer, she's running around, dipping in the cells. But at the same time, I have trouble picking out a queen, and I guess everybody does. And so you put a little dot of paint on her head. That's a marked queen. And the beekeepers have it's a standardized set of colors. So, and they use the acronym, why you raise green bees. White, yellow, red, green, blue. Every year, this queen was from a couple of years ago, that year was blue. And so everybody's queens that hatch that year, when they mark them, and you catch them, you put them in a little teeny cage, and you put dot of paint on their head. Everybody used blue that year. So if you see a bee next year, a queen, and she's got a blue dot on her head, that's last year's queen. And as opposed to the next year, which was white, so you would see the white bee. So that's what the dot is all about. It's so much easier when you have a marked queen and you're going through the hive and you're looking for the queen, because it's busy. The bees are everywhere, and you're trying to pick out the queen. And I know people who are better at it than I am, and people who do a lot more beekeeping than I do will spot them more readily. But it's a job sometimes to pick them out. I look for the dot. Now, right now, the queens in both of my hives are unmarked. So when I go through the hive, first thing you could, if you say, golly, is there a queen in here? First of all, sometimes you can tell by their behavior. If they don't have a queen, they're unhappy. The term they use is grumpy. They're unhappy, they're more aggressive. But also, you will look for eggs. But eggs they're smaller than a grain of rice. I have a heck of a time spotting the eggs too with my veil on. But the eggs are in the cell for about 3 days, and then they develop into a larva. And so when I'm looking through the hive, I'm looking for a larva and some larva that's been capped already. That tells me, well, at least 3 days ago there was a queen in here. And so I use that because I'm just not that good at spotting that queen. But that's the purpose of the mark. And when you buy a queen, you always buy it marked.
Jennifer, thank you
Yep.
so much for your time